An experienced captain faces every pilot's worst nightmare: double engine failure with nearly 500 souls on board, over the ocean, while approaching an airport that had just been closed for operations. With only minutes to make impossible decisions, he must choose between attempting the impossible or accepting the unacceptable. A story about the limits of human capacity, technical training, and the courage to trust your instincts when all the manuals have already failed. There are moments in life when you realize that everything you learned, every hour of training, every simulation, was preparing you for a single instant. Mine came at 11,000 feet altitude, with 478 lives in my hands and 2 dead engines. If you've ever wondered what goes through a pilot's head when everything goes wrong at the same time, stay with me here. This is the story of a flight that should never have made it to the ground, but did. My name is Richard Santos. I'm 52 years old, and I've been flying commercially for 28 of them. I've logged over 15,000 flight hours, most of them on international routes. That day started like so many others in my career. Routine pre-flight check, crew briefing, passengers boarding with that mix of anxiety and anticipation that always accompanies long trips. Our Boeing 737-800 was pristine, fresh out of scheduled maintenance. We had 478 souls on board, a number that never left my mind, including 2 crew teams, entire families returning from vacations, executives rushing to meetings, and that elderly lady in seat 23A who reminded me of my mother. The co-pilot was Fernando Martinez, 34 years old, competent and calm, with whom I had flown dozens of times. We had that rare connection that develops between pilots who trust each other completely. Takeoff was smooth. The sky was clear with perfect visibility, and favorable winds promised a smooth 5-hour flight. We climbed to our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet without any issues. Passengers were already relaxed, some sleeping, others watching movies, children playing in the aisles. It was exactly the kind of uneventful flight every pilot wants, until it wasn't anymore. We were approximately 200 nautical miles from our destination, beginning descent preparation, when I heard that sound. It wasn't loud, but it was wrong. Completely wrong. After so many years flying, you develop an almost telepathic connection with the aircraft. Every vibration, every noise tells a story. And that sound was telling me something very serious was happening in engine number 1. Before I could verbalize my concern, the alarms went off. The panel lit up like an apocalyptic Christmas tree, red lights flashing, audible alerts competing for attention, and that message no pilot wants to see. Engine 1 failure. My training kicked in automatically. Fernando, we have failure on engine 1. Initiating inoperative engine procedure. My voice was calm, professional, but my heart was racing. An engine failure is serious, but it's something we train for exhaustively. A 737-800 flies perfectly well on one engine. We started the checklist, communicated with air traffic control, prepared for an emergency landing. Everything was under control. We had 3 engines remaining. Sorry, 1 engine remaining. 1 is all we need. I held on to that thought as my hand reached for the controls. That's when the impossible happened. Exactly 47 seconds after the first failure, yes, I know the exact time because those seconds were etched into my soul, engine number 2 began showing the same indications. No, I thought, this can't be happening. Double engine failures are statistically so improbable that some pilots go their entire careers without even simulating one. The probability is 1 in a billion, but there it was, happening to us at 11,000 feet altitude, with 478 people who trusted that I knew what to do. Engine 2 with critical temperature and vibration indication, Fernando shouted, and for the first time I heard real fear in his voice. Richard, we're losing 2 as well. The second engine failed completely 15 seconds later. The silence that followed was deafening. When you're used to the constant roar of jet engines, silence is terrifying. It wasn't total silence. We still had auxiliary systems, airflow over the fuselage, but it was the silence of an aircraft without propulsion, transformed into a 70-ton glider, beginning its inexorable descent toward the ocean. I looked at the altimeter, 10,800 feet and falling. The physics were cruel and simple. Without engines, we were descending at approximately 1,000 feet per minute. That gave us, at best, 10 minutes before we met the ocean. 10 minutes to do the impossible. Control, this is flight. We have double engine failure, declaring maximum emergency. We need immediate landing options. My voice was steady, but my hands were trembling imperceptibly on the controls. The response from control came quickly, but brought the worst possible news. Flight, be advised that the destination airport was closed 15 minutes ago due to aircraft incursion on the runway. There is no forecast for reopening. The nearest alternate is 85 nautical miles away. 85 miles. May not sound like much, but when you're falling from the sky without engines, it might as well be the distance to the moon. I did the mental calculations. Our glide ratio was approximately 15.1. For every 15,000 feet of altitude, we could glide about 15 nautical miles in ideal conditions. We were at 10,000 feet. That gave us maybe 10 miles of range, being generous. Fernando, give me complete specs on the closed airport, distance, direction, runway length. While he searched for the information, my mind was processing possibilities. The closed airport was only 25 nautical miles away. We could reach it. The problem was, it was closed for a good reason. Richard, Fernando said slowly, reading the NOTAM. There's a disabled aircraft blocking the main runway. They're trying to remove it, but he didn't need to finish. But it wouldn't be in time. I looked through the windshield. Down below, the ocean stretched infinite and indifferent. Behind me, separated only by a door, were 478 people living their final moments in complete ignorance of what was happening. Some would be sleeping, others laughing at something in the movie. The lady in 23A was probably knitting. They trusted me, trusted that I knew how to fly, trusted that I would keep them safe, and I was about to disappoint them in a way few pilots ever experience. I attempted engine restart. The procedure is in the checklist, practiced in simulators, but rarely works in real situations. I adjusted fuel settings, reset electrical systems, followed every step meticulously. Nothing. The engines were dead. The subsequent analysis would reveal that an extremely rare fuel contamination, something that passed through all filters and checks, had caused simultaneous crystallization in both engines. A 1 in a billion coincidence. But at that moment I didn't know that. All I knew was that nothing I did was bringing the engines back to life. 9,200 feet. The decision stood before me like an abyss. I could try the ocean, a ditching as we call it, established protocol, clear procedures, reasonable chances of survival if everything went perfectly. But perfectly rarely happens when you're landing a 70-ton aircraft in water at 140 knots. The waves were at 2 meters, significant crosswinds. Many would die on impact, others during evacuation. We'd be lucky if half survived. Or I could try the closed airport. I could order them to clear the runway. I could risk an approach on a potentially obstructed runway. I could put all 478 lives on a single high-risk bet. If there was any obstacle, any emergency vehicle still on the runway, any piece of debris from the disabled aircraft, there would be no second chance. We'd hit at 140 knots into metal and concrete. Control, I said, and my voice carried the weight of the decision I was making. We're going to attempt the closed airport. I need you to coordinate complete runway clearance. We're committed to this approach. There is no alternative. There was a pause from the other side. They knew what I was asking. They were asking me to wait for confirmation of clear runway, but I didn't have time to wait. 8,400 feet and falling. Understood, came the response finally. All vehicles being directed away from runway 27. The disabled aircraft is being towed, but it won't finish in time, I completed. I know, just tell me exactly where it is. As we flew that giant glider toward the airport, every decision mattered. Altitude was our only resource, and I had to manage it like a miser counts coins. Too high on final approach and we'd overshoot the runway, too low and we wouldn't make it. Fernando was beside me doing continuous calculations, calling out altitudes, distances, approach angles. We both knew this was all or nothing. 7,200 feet. The tower came on the radio. Flight, the aircraft is being removed from the runway intersection. You'll have approximately 2,100 meters of usable runway if you land at the beginning of 27. Repeat, 2,100 meters. A 737-800 normally needs about 1,500 meters to land in ideal conditions. But without engines, without thrust reversers, depending only on brakes and spoilers, This was going to be tight, very tight. "I'll take it," I replied. There was no choice. It was that or the ocean, and I had already made my decision. I gave a warning to the cabin crew. "Crew, Captain. Double engine failure. Landing at airport with partially obstructed runway. Begin preparation for emergency landing. Brace positions in 3 minutes." My voice came out calm, but I knew what I was triggering back there. The flight attendants would immediately begin the protocol, instructing passengers on safety position, ensuring everything was stowed, preparing emergency exits. And the passengers would finally know something was terribly wrong. 6,000 feet. I could see the airport in the distance. I could also see emergency vehicles lined up along the runway, lights flashing. I could see the aircraft being towed, moving with agonizing slowness. "They're not going to make it," Fernando murmured. "They're going to make it," I said, more to myself than to him. "They have to make it." I began configuring the aircraft for landing. Flaps extended to landing position. This would increase our drag, but also improve our control capability at low speed. Landing gear down. Each decision was a balance between necessity and consequence. If you're enjoying this real story from the skies, leave your like so more people can learn about the work pilots do. And tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced an emergency on a flight? 5,000 feet. We were on final approach. The runway was directly ahead, growing slowly in my vision. Too slowly. I made an adjustment to the angle, sacrificing a bit more altitude to ensure we'd make it. The airspeed indicator showed 180 knots. I needed to slow to 140 before touchdown, but every knot of speed was altitude I could convert to distance. It was a deadly precise numbers game. 3,000 feet, descent rate 900 feet per minute, Fernando called. "Tower, last update on the runway?" "Flight, the tow is almost complete. We estimate 40 more seconds." 40 seconds. I did the mental calculation quickly. We'd touch the ground in approximately 90 seconds. It would be enough, it had to be. 2,000 feet. I could see faces in the terminal windows. I could see firefighters in their trucks, prepared for the worst. I could see the aircraft being towed, finally clearing the intersection. "Runway is clear, runway is clear." The tower's voice was loaded with relief and urgency. "Flight cleared to land runway 27. All emergency services on maximum alert status." "Roger," I replied. My throat was dry. My hands, curiously, had stopped shaking. It was as if my entire body knew this was the moment, and nothing but perfection mattered. 1,000 feet. The runway filled my windshield. I could see every marking, every light, every imperfection in the concrete. 500 feet. My hand was steady on the yoke, making micro-adjustments every second. 200 feet. We were too high and too fast. 100 feet. I pulled the nose slightly up, bleeding speed. 50 feet. The aircraft wanted to sink faster. I fought against it. 20 feet. The ground rushed beneath us at a terrible speed, and then we touched down. The main landing gear met the concrete with an impact that shook the entire structure. I immediately applied the brakes, not too hard or the tires would blow, but firm and steady. I extended the spoilers fully. The aircraft decelerated, but seemed to be doing it in slow motion. The end of the runway was approaching at alarming speed. 100 knots, 80 knots. The 2,100-meter mark passed. We were in the overrun zone, that area beyond the guaranteed length. 60 knots. The brakes were boiling, I could feel it through the pedal. 40 knots, 20 knots. The aircraft finally stopped. By my later calculation, we had 180 meters to the end of the runway. About 2 more seconds of roll. The silence that followed was absolute. Then slowly the applause began. From inside the passenger cabin, an ovation that grew like a wave. Fernando was looking at me with wide eyes. We made it," he whispered. I could only nod. My hands were shaking again, all the adrenaline finally taking its toll. The evacuation was ordered by protocol, although there was no fire or immediate danger. Passengers slid down the inflatable slides in surprisingly calm order. From my seat, I watched each one of them exit. All 478 souls I had brought back to the ground. The lady from seat 23A was one of the last. She looked back and waved at me before going down. I waved back, not trusting my voice. The investigation that followed was extensive. They discovered that fuel contamination had occurred during refueling at the origin airport. A catastrophic failure, in multiple verification systems that allowed fuel contaminated with traces of an incompatible biodiesel compound to enter the tanks. Under normal conditions, it wouldn't cause problems. But at cruising altitude, with the specific temperatures of that day, it formed microscopic crystals that simultaneously blocked the fuel systems of both engines. A coincidence so rare that statisticians calculated it could happen once every 500 million flights. I was called a hero by the media. I received commendations, appeared on television programs, gave countless interviews. But I don't feel like a hero. Heroes make brave choices. I made the only choice that remained. I made decisions based on training, experience, and yes, a bit of luck. The elderly lady from 23A sent me a letter 3 months later. She wrote that she was returning from visiting her son for the last time. He had died of cancer 2 weeks before the flight. She was going home to process her grief, prepare the funeral, deal with the loss. "You gave me time," she wrote, "time to say goodbye properly, time to honor my son, time to find some peace. Thank you for bringing us home." I flew for 5 more years after that incident before retiring. Every flight, every takeoff and landing carried the weight of that day. Not in a negative way. It was a reminder of why we do what we do, why procedures exist, why we train relentlessly for situations we hope never to face. Fernando still flies. We talk occasionally. Neither of us speaks much about that day, but we don't need to. There's an understanding between people who lived through something like that together. Aviation is statistically the safest means of transportation ever created by humanity. This isn't an accident. It's the result of decades of learning, of every incident studied meticulously, of every possible failure considered and mitigated. But statistics don't matter when you're the pilot facing the 1 in a billion event. In that moment, everything comes down to training, judgment, and the courage to make decisions under unimaginable pressure. That flight changed how I see aviation. It didn't make me more fearful, the opposite, actually. It made me deeply appreciate the redundant systems, the procedures, the exhaustive training that prepares us for the impossible. It made me value every smooth landing, every uneventful flight, every day when the extraordinary doesn't happen. And it taught me that sometimes, when you've lost all your engines, when the airport is closed, when all the odds are against you, you still have one thing: your ability to make the right decision at the right moment. I keep thinking about how each small variable could have changed the outcome. If we had been 2,000 feet lower when the engines failed, if the airport had been 10 miles farther, if the disabled aircraft hadn't been removed in time, if I had chosen the ocean instead of the runway. If. Aviation is a constant dance with fate, where preparation meets opportunity, where training meets crisis, where human judgment still matters despite all the automation and technology. Today, when I see a plane pass over my house, I think about the people inside it. They think they're just going from one place to another, but they're also placing extraordinary trust in people they'll never meet. The pilot up there might have 30 years of experience, or might be in their first month as captain, but all of them have trained for the day when everything goes wrong. All of them know what to do when engines stop, when systems fail, when the impossible happens. Those 478 people will never fully know how close we came that day. They know there was an emergency, that it was scary, that something went wrong, but they don't know about the frantic mental calculations. They don't know about the choice between the ocean and the obstructed runway. They don't know about the 180 meters that remained when we stopped. Maybe that's better, but I know, Fernando knows. And everyone who flies commercially should know that, when they board a plane, there are people in the cockpit who are prepared to do the impossible if necessary. Aviation taught me that control is an illusion. We don't control the weather, we don't control mechanical failures, we don't control luck. But we control how we respond. We control our training, our preparation, our ability to make decisions under pressure. And in the end, when you're at 11,000 feet with 2 dead engines and 478 lives depending on you, that's all that matters. Sometimes I still dream about that day. In the dream, I'm making the approach again, but this time the numbers don't work out. We're too low, too slow, and the ocean rises to meet us. I wake up sweating, heart racing, but then I remember we landed. All 478 people walked away. We did our job, and that has to be enough. The thing about flying is you never stop learning. Every flight teaches something new, every situation challenges you in different ways. That flight taught me about limits, the aircraft's mind, physics and lux. It taught me that sometimes doing everything right still isn't enough, and you need to do more. It taught me that the difference between tragedy and triumph can be measured in seconds, in meters, in decisions made in fractions of a second that you can never really train for, because each situation is unique. Years later, I ran into one of the passengers from that flight at a random airport. He recognized me from the news. "You saved my life," he said simply. I didn't know what to answer. Did I do my job? Was I lucky? Did I do what any pilot would do? In the end, I just thanked him and wished him a good flight. But his words stayed with me. Not just his, but from all 478 people. Each one of them had stories, had people who loved them, had places to go and things to do. And for a moment, all of that depended on a few meters of runway and the ability of two pilots to make the right decisions. If you haven't subscribed to the Black Box channel yet, do it now so you don't miss any real stories from our skies. Pilots have incredible stories to tell, and I'm here to share them with you. I don't know if I had courage that day or just did what had to be done. I don't know if my decisions were brilliant or just adequate. What I know is that when the impossible happens, when you lose everything except your ability to think and react, you discover what you're really made of. And that day, I discovered that years of training, thousands of flight hours, and a lifetime of preparation can come down to a single moment where everything matters and nothing else exists beyond the task at hand. Modern commercial aviation is a miracle of engineering and procedure. But at the center of everything, there's still a human being making decisions. And when everything fails, when machines stop and systems collapse, it's that human being who makes the difference. I hope you never need to discover what your pilot is capable of when everything goes wrong. But if you do, know that he or she trained for it, prepared for it, and will do everything humanly possible to bring you home safely. Want to learn more real aviation stories like this? Use the QR code appearing on your screen now to get the ebook Black Box 100 Air Accidents That Changed Aviation Forever for a special price you won't find anywhere else. There are 100 real cases, analyzed in detail, with lessons that changed aviation forever. That flight was 8 years ago. The 478 people moved on with their lives. Most probably don't think about that day anymore. But I think about it, not with horror or trauma, but with deep gratitude. Gratitude for having had the necessary training, for having a competent co-pilot beside me, for the runway being cleared in time, for the distance being sufficient, for the brakes holding up, for every little thing that had to go right having gone right that day. And when I look at the sky now and see a plane passing, I don't think about statistics or probabilities. I think about people, pilots, passengers, families. I think about stories being written at 37,000 feet, most of them perfectly normal and uneventful. And occasionally, very occasionally, I think about stories like mine, stories of when everything goes wrong but ends right anyway. Because in the end, it's not about the engines that failed. It's about the people who didn't fail. It's about making impossible decisions and living with them. It's about doing your job when doing your job means the difference between life and death. It's about those rare and terrible moments where everything you are and everything you know is tested in a way you never imagined. And it's about discovering that when your turn comes, you're up to the challenge. Flying is a privilege and a responsibility. Every time a pilot takes the controls, they're accepting responsibility for every life on the aircraft. Most of the time, that responsibility is exercised in routine situations, but sometimes, very rarely, it's tested in extraordinary ways. And it's in those moments that you discover who you really are. So if someday you're on a flight and things go wrong, remember, there's someone in the cockpit who knows what to do, someone who trained for it, who prepared for it, who's ready for it, someone who will do whatever it takes to bring you home, because that's what we do. That's why we exist. And when called, when tested, when placed in that impossible situation, we'll do the impossible to ensure you see your family again. Would you fly with me again after that experience? Many passengers from that flight said yes. Some said they'd never fly again. I understand both. But here's the truth. That was the safest flight you could have been on, because it was the flight where everything that could go wrong went wrong, and still everyone survived. The chances of it happening again? Astronomical. But the chances of having a prepared pilot if it happens? Guaranteed. Now, if you stayed with me this far, If you followed this journey from those first alarms to the last meters of runway, leave me a comment telling me, where are you watching from? And if you know someone who should hear this story, share it. Because aviation stories aren't just about planes and technology. They're about people, decisions, and the moments that define who we are. And remember, the next time you board a plane, there's someone in the cockpit whose entire career comes down to a single objective, ensuring you reach your destination safely. Most of the time, you'll never know how good they are, but very occasionally, in rare and extraordinary moments, you'll find out. And in those moments, you'll understand why we trust our lives to those people who chose the sky as their office and the safety of others as their mission. This was my moment, my test, my story. And if you learned something from it, if it made you think differently about flying, about decisions under pressure, or about the value of training and preparation, then it was worth sharing. Because in the end, we're not defined by the easy moments. We're defined by how we respond when everything is against us, and we still find a way.